902. And now with our lesson, Eli Cole.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Most who are here now were here last night and know that we had a good time. I hope that you slept well. I hope that the stuff you ate didn't cause you to have bad dreams. If that's true. Some people could eat something and have bad dreams because you eat some sweet stuff late at night. But I didn't have bad dreams. Because I avoided most of the sweet stuff. And of course, I avoided most of the sweet stuff because the food police were back in town. Of course, we know the food police to be Andrea and Priscilla. So they are the food police, and of course, with Alice, they're back in town visiting. And we're glad that I was able to hang out in Georgia and bring them back up this time and make the drive a little bit shorter, having them with us. It was funny listening to that last song because the first verse was really, really strong because that's the one that you hear all the time. Afterwards, not so much until you get to the oh, and then it gets strong again. Kind of like the "We Wish You a Merry Christmas" last night. You know, "We wish you a Merry," and then the first verse was really good, and after you get to the second, not so much. So it's interesting. Christmas has kind of become, it's just a big time for us. You know, and I struggled for years with what to do about Christmas. Because the more theologically trained I became, the more it was obvious to me that one of my main beliefs was being challenged. And it was this. I always said, or always thought, when I first was baptized, when I first started preaching, that if one of the apostles came back now, they would recognize what we were doing. That was what I thought. Because we tried very hard within the Church of Christ to recreate New Testament, first century Christianity. That's what we try to do. And as you go through and read the Bible and read the extra biblical sources, you don't find a celebration like this one, like Christmas. So, you know, that left me kind of baffled, kind of angry. And so I didn't deal with it for a number of years. And if I did deal with it, I would preach a series, explaining that, not so much. Shouldn't do it. Then I figured out that this has become such a big part of Americana, a worldwide celebration even, that fighting against it was like fighting, it was like fighting a battleship of paper airplanes. You're not going to win that fight. So I started saying, well, what do we do with it? What do we do with it? And so what I've done in recent years is I've got a perfect opportunity to look at the good in it. Goodwill on earth. Also, peace on earth, rather. Goodwill towards men. That's become a staple of this time of the year. And that's good. That's good. And people do that because of the influence of Christ in the world. And that's good. And people associate peace on earth and goodwill toward men with Jesus. That's good. And we ought to be proud of that. We ought to be glad about that. So what I try to do during this time of the year is try to dig down and try to just bring up a couple of points about Jesus, because everybody's talking about Jesus. If you watch A&E or the Biography Channel or History Channel, there are going to be different things about the life of Jesus on almost this entire week. They're going to be on. So those are good things. What I chose from the Bible today, very basic, very, very familiar to members of the Church of Christ. It's in Matthew chapter 16. Now, you don't know the sermon I'm going to preach from this, because when you hear Matthew chapter 16, you think that one sermon's coming, but I can promise you it's another one. Matthew chapter 16. And we'll start at verse 13 and read down a little ways. Jesus came into the region of Caesarea Philippi. Many of us can quote this, I'm sure. He asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So they said, "Some say John the Baptist, some Elijah, and others Jeremiah, one of the prophets." He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" So Peter answered and said, Simon Peter answered and said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered and said to him, "Blessed are you," or if you got the old King James, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed it to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." I know what many of you are thinking, because when we preach this sermon, we usually, or when we see this text, we associate it with the doctrines that are very central and very core to who we are in the churches of Christ. And the reason that we do that, because in verse 18, we find that Jesus built a church. We find that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. We find that Jesus claims the church as his own. We also find that the church is singular. So these are ideas that we've preached and heard about for years. And you say, well, and I've had people say, "Why do you guys in the church always want to run to those doctrinal discussions?" And I say, well, you know, if you place it in its place in the Bible contextually, even if you go back to Matthew chapter 15, you find that a discussion was going on about tradition and religious doctrine. And so you find out that what Jesus was doing with the scribes and Pharisees, he talked about their religious practices of the day. So when you talk about religious doctrine, it fits. Even in the chapter 16, we're just above where I started in today's reading. Pharisees and Sadducees talked to Jesus. And if you go down to verse number 5, the Bible says that his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. And Jesus said to them, "Take heed," verse 6, "and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have taken no bread. And Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "You of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves? Because you brought no bread." And then he corrects them. And in verse 12, Matthew records that they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of the bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and Sadducees. So you see, a doctrinal discussion at this time is appropriate, because that's what's going on in the text. It's appropriate. We're going to have one of those today, but it ain't going to be the doctrinal discussion you're thinking. The doctrinal discussion that we're going to have today, or the doctrinal discourse that we're going to have today, is not going to be centered around verse number 18. That's where a lot of you thought I was going to run. And that's where a lot of you might have thought I was going to stay. Today I'm not going to even deal very much with verse number 18 until the end. I'm going to deal primarily with the questions that were asked and in the truth that was given. Jesus wanted to know, before he got to the discussion about doctrine, because as he revealed the church, he also talked about the fact that he had to death. He had to die. He had to talk about the reward. He had to talk about the second coming. There was a transfiguration. There was all these things that were built later. But before he could do the building and the laying on top of, there was something that had to be foundational. There had to be a foundational rock, a cornerstone. And that was, who was Jesus? Because who you believe Jesus is the basis of everything else. If you got the wrong idea about who Jesus is, everything that you build on top of that idea is going to be flawed. It's not going to fit. So before going into all of this other stuff, that's very important stuff, key stuff. The revelation of the church is key. The fact that he had to die was important. All that, second coming, important. But if you don't understand who Jesus is, you will not have a good understanding of the rest of it. So today, we look at the question, who do men say that I am? Now, Jesus had been walking around, he had been teaching, he'd done some miracles, he had caused quite a stir. Now, in that day, there was no Twitter. Because, you know, if you do anything now, it gets on Twitter in a hurry. If you do anything now, somebody's got a camera phone looking at it. They're going to take a picture of it. It's on the internet, it's on YouTube, and it's viral. Before you know it. Is that right? Well, we didn't have that back in that time. However, Jesus had done such incredible things. Such incredible things. He walked on water. He still, what was that song we were just singing? Peace be still. The winds and the waters obeyed at will. Obeyed his will. These are big events that happened. So his reputation had preceded him everywhere that he had gone. There were dead people who were now walking around again. He had fed people. I mean, crowds, thousands of people, with nothing more than a little boy's lunch. Can you imagine a lunch box? A $6 million man lunch kit, amen. That was my favorite. $6 million man, Steve Austin, a man barely alive, yeah. He kept rebuilding. I knew the whole thing. That was my favorite one. And you take what's in there and you feed 4,000 or 5,000 people with that. People talk about that. That's pretty incredible. Jesus gets to a point. The rubber has met the road. He's confronted the Pharisees and the scribes. And so now he asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? They've seen all this stuff, but do they understand what they're looking at? Who do they say I am? John the Baptist, some people said. Now, the people who said this, they're professing Jesus to be a great person, a good person, a person that had a spirit that was willing to be martyred for his faith. Back in Matthew chapter 14, even Herod might have thought that Jesus was John the Baptist reincarnated or something like that. It was a spirit, it was indwelt. So there were people who thought that perhaps Jesus was John the Baptist. There were some who saw the similarity between what John did and what Jesus did. And John, of course, was the forerunner. He was a forerunner. So it was natural there'd be some association there. But Jesus was no John the Baptist. John the Baptist was no Jesus. Some thought Jesus was my favorite guy in the whole Bible next to Jesus. Elijah. That's right. That's my favorite guy in the whole Bible next to Jesus. Elijah was considered to be the greatest prophet, the greatest teacher of all times. Some people consider him forerunner of the Messiah, back to Malachi. One of the commentators, and I don't want to get too deep in this, but one of the main commentators pointed out that the Jews expect Elijah to return still before the Messiah, because they look at Jesus not how we look at Jesus. They look at him as kind of a prophet kind of guy who went off the rails a little bit, and so they're still waiting on the Messiah. They're still waiting on Elijah to come before him, and they still leave a seat, I'm told, when they observe their deal for Elijah in case he shows up. Did you know that? I didn't know that either. I read it, but I didn't know it. Elijah was a big deal to them. So when they see all these things, guess what? Some people say, Jesus is Elijah. Some people said Jeremiah. Jesus was Jeremiah. He was not Jeremiah. Some said he was one of the other prophets. He was not one of the other prophets. They associated perhaps some of the weeping. Jeremiah was a weeping prophet. Jesus brought truth. He was clearly of God. They thought maybe he's one of the prophets. I want us to understand something. And it's not important necessarily to understand all the theological why they did have these opinions. But what I pointed all that out to say is this. Just like there was no consensus back then about who Jesus is, there is still not a consensus today about who Jesus is. There's still not a consensus. There are some people who think that he was only a man of righteousness who was martyred for his faith, just like John the Baptist. Some people think that, you know what, he was one of the greatest teachers. He was only just one of the greatest teachers and prophets in history, like Elijah. There are others who think that he was just a guy who revealed some very important things about God and about living, like Jeremiah. There are some others who think that he was a great prophet or a great and just man who was sent to the people of his day. And we can learn a lot about God and a lot about living righteously by studying his life. People believe a lot of those things. They fall short of believing that he was the Christ. He is the Christ, Son of the living God. Now this is where we have the rubber meeting the road. We cannot let people get away with that. Let me tell you why. He claimed to be the Son of the living God. When Peter said it, he says to him, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." So now he says, you got it right. And upon this rock, I'm going to build my son. You got it right. There are other places. John 17, where he says, you know what? Let them be one just as you and I, Father, are one. He claims to be God. Read John chapter 1. He's not just a great man or any of this kind of stuff. Don't let him stake out the middle ground. Because there's one truth with two options. He was either who he said he was, or he was the greatest deceiver in the history of the world. There are no two ways about that. There's not this, well, he was kind of good, but not really. If you believe him, you believe him to be the Son of God. That's what he said. It's the same thing with the Bible. People want to take the Bible and play with it and say, well, this part is not true, and that part is true, and this part was written by other people who passed it off as being this, but it's not really Scripture. Now, it doesn't all apply to us. Some was in the Old Testament, some apply it to them, and it was washed away and all that kind of stuff. True. But but the Bible is either true or it's not true. It's either true or it's not true. There's no middle ground. So as we have all these celebrations, as people want to talk about Jesus, what I encourage them to do is embrace his lordship. Embrace him for who he said he was. The Son of God. When Peter revealed him to be thou art the Christ, he said, you are the Messiah. You are the anointed one. You're the one we've been waiting for. It's you. All those prophecies in the Old Testament. You can go back and read the Messianic prophecies. He said, this is about you. It's you. When he says, the Son of God, he's acknowledging his divine power. He's saying, You are the same as. Now, my son is not me, but he's made out of the same stuff that I'm made out of. You understand that? Okay, that's what he said. You are the Son of God. You're the same thing. You're a different being, but you're the same thing. You have that power. This is what he's saying about him. Now, when you understand that, now we're ready for the other things that come with it. You see, when people say today that Jesus was a wise man, what they are trying to do is distance themselves and make themselves less accountable for some of the things that he said that they don't want to do. No, he's the Christ. He's the Son of God. The claims that he has a claim on my life. At one point, every knee shall bow, every tongue shall confess that he is the Christ. Amen. Now that's who he is. He's nothing less than that. And I'm bound by the things that he said. It's not just about, well, you know, the Bible, there's some truth in it. No, it is the truth. Not some truth in it, it's the truth. Now, that's the basis. That's the basis. Think about Acts 2. Think about Acts 2. Peter preaches this sermon. At the conclusion of the sermon, all the points he made from the old bringing them through the prophecies, he says to them, men of Israel, know this day that Jesus, the one you killed, has been made Lord and Christ. Now, they have to accept that. And they do. And based on that, it's right after that they say, okay, what shall we do? In other words, we've got the basic idea now. We understand the truth. What do we do about the truth that we understand? See, it's very important to understand the truth before you can do what you need to do. If you've got an erroneous idea, it's just like math. You know, if you can't add, subtract, multiply, and divide, algebra's going to kill you. It's going to do you in. It's going to be ugly. It's going to be a blowout. You got to have the right math teacher sit there. But you know, it's one of those things that there has to be the proper base, the proper foundation. We've got an opportunity right now, before we talk about baptism, before we talk about being a member of the church, before we talk about living a holy life and all those things that we better talk about, before we talk about all those things that we better talk about, we better get back to establishing that Jesus is Lord. He sits at the right hand of the Father. There was a time in the United States, as I'm studying this, why people are leaving the church. Dr. Yagley, one of the main researchers in the Churches of Christ, made a point. He said that when he started preaching in the 1950s, it was almost a certainty that 90-something% of the people he ran into believed in God, the Father, the Son, Holy Ghost, Jesus as Lord. They believed the Bible to be the Word of God. They believed in sin. They believed in the need for salvation from sin. They believed in a heaven and a hell. They believed in all these things. So he can start with doctrine. He can start with how we worship. He can start there. Now, that's not the case. That's not the case. People's belief system in this diverse, affirming society that we live in believes some of everything. So now, we can't start where they started 50 or 60 years ago and expect to be able to bring people. We've got to start back with The same place Jesus started. Who do they say that I am? I can't teach you anything else until you know who I am. You're not ready to hear the rest of it until you know who I am. That's where we have to go now. And we've got to get out of namby-pamby land. And we've got to let them get out of namby-pamby land. Don't let them say things like, well, you know, yeah, we like that Jesus. He's a son of God. No, that's not what he said. Oh, yeah, that Jesus is something. That's only a wise prophet. A lot of great teachers, a lot of great truth came from that man. No, that's not it. We've got to get a verse that's saying he is the Christ, the Son of God. And we can't move off that point. And if they don't like it, we got to stay on it anyway. We got to argue it just like we argue what's happening down the street in Washington. Amen, Waltz. You got to believe that even more than that thing down in Washington. If you're here today, Jesus is the Son of God. That's who he is. He's the Christ. You go back and read the Old Testament, so much of it is about him, about his coming, about what it would mean to mankind when he got here. Read the New Testament, it reveals him. It reveals him. It reveals what's available to us now that he has come, now that he has been crucified, now that he has gotten up on the third day. What's available to, but it all starts with believing who he is. And I keep saying who he is because although he died, he got up. You see, when we speak of God, we're not speaking of something that's dead. This is why he calls him son of the living God. See, in that day, in that polytheistic society, they worship dead idols. They worship dead idols. But no, this is a living God. And that's how God was referred to, the living God. So when they associated Jesus with him, they said, you are son of the living God. So I don't refer to him as who he was, because he still is that person. That's who he is. So if you're here today, you're going to eventually have to deal with the truth of who he is. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. My college students, it's like that. That's like that. I see a couple of them here today, including mine. It's like that final exam day. Whether you like it or not, that day on the syllabus is going to come true one day. And you got to be ready for that final when it comes. And it's coming. So now guess what? It's going to come whether you're ready or not. Now, this is one test you can't afford to fail. Because there are no do-overs. There's no retakes. You flunk this one, it's for eternity. So if you're here today, and you want to be ready, if you want to respond in peace and be able to take advantage of what Jesus has done, you've heard a portion of his word today. Are you ready to believe that he is the Son of God? And if you're ready to believe that, now that's your basis, that's your foundation. You're going to stand on that, come what may. And based on who he is and your faith in who he is, that's what causes repentance. It's because of who he is. It's yielding to him. It's not just about becoming a member of some group. No, it's yielding to God. That's what it is, turning your life over. Whatever you do today, it's just going to be one day. You're yielding the rest of your life to him is what we're talking about. So now, you confess that he's the Son of God. You believe it. You're turning your life around based on that. You fix your mouth to say, he is the Son of God. That confession is important. It was worth dying over for him. And he won. You confess me, your mouth before men. Right? I confess you before my Father in heaven. But if what? If you deny me before men, what did he say? I'll deny you. So who he is important. Now, after you've accepted all that, you've done, what else you have to do? You baptize. But if you get in water and you immersed without all of that, you just went swimming. And swimming does not save you. What saves us is obedience to God. And that just happens to be what he's commanded. Baptism. And then he adds you to that organization that he talked about. But again, it's foundational to up on this rock. What was the rock? The truth that Peter spoke. That thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. If you're here today and you're ready to respond in faith because of who he is, you can do so now. Together we stand and sing the song of encouragement.